I'm not going to take too much of your time. I just want to share some thoughts about PSHE education at a time when the present is at best weird and the future is at best uncertain. And of course, PSHE, the magic part of the curriculum, is and always has been about the present and the future. It is about young people in the present, right now, how they navigate their daily lives and experiences with relationships and sex, drugs and alcohol, risk and opportunity, danger and growth, all of the choppy waters of adolescence. That's the present. And PSHE is also about the future. It's about young people's aspirations, their careers, their future relationships, their future health. It's about supporting them to identify what matters to them and lead a life that they choose. That's the future. So for PSHE to be fit for our children, we need to know what the present looks like for them right now. We need to know what issues they're facing, what they're worried about, what they're excited about, what really matters to them. And we need to know what their future might look like, so we can prepare them as best we can for the opportunities and challenges of adult life. But COVID-19 has upended our present and scrambled the signals from the future, so it's hard to look beyond the end of next week, let alone next year or young people's next steps. That doesn't mean PSHE can't respond. And if you only take one thing away from what I say, it's that PSHE education has never been more vital. But if it's to fulfill its promise and possibility, we must recognize the apocalyptic nature of what we are experiencing. And before you get too concerned, I mean apocalyptic not in its modern sense of the end of days, but its older meaning of revelation, uncovering, unveiling. For COVID has revealed things about us and our country, which of course we've known were there for a long time. But somehow the way it has told this old story has a fresh power, and we need to listen. So let's think about the present and the future. Let's think about right now. What's it like for children and young people coming out of lockdown, coming back to school, or not? Well, let's think about the last few months for all of us. They've been impossibly hard for many. Many people have experienced loss of friends and family through death, loss of income, loss of livelihood. Everyone has experienced some loss of control over our lives, a loss of everyday freedoms, and loss of the things which keep us anchored to our own lives, like work, hobbies, daily travel, meetings with friends, the things which give us a sense of progress, and in many ways give our lives meaning and purpose. And with this loss comes some anxiety, probably for everyone, some fear and apprehension about whether what has been lost will return, what other losses are to come. And yet, despite this loss, the anxiety, and for all the monotony of lockdown, for many life has gone on. Days have passed, emotions have ebbed and flowed. For those of us locked down at home, in startling contrast to the noise and pressure out there in the NHS, in care homes, on the front line, perhaps there have been moments of calm, of balance, of peace. As if the need for speed and movement and progress was momentarily paused. And perhaps there have been unexpected moments of joy. I know I have had some, and I hope you have too. A moment when someone helped you, or you helped someone else, or a moment where you looked in the sky and didn't see a single plane and realized you hadn't for days, or paused to listen for the rumble of traffic and heard nothing. You can probably tell these are personal reflections, but the point I want to make is that whatever it has been like for you, your experience over the last 3 months is unique to you. The ups and downs, the stresses and solutions, the arguments and the agreements. And so it will have been for children and young people. There will be as many stories of life in lockdown as there are pupils in your classrooms, and we mustn't assume what children and young people's lived experience has been. We have to start from where children and young people are to understand the issues they face right now, the things they care about right now, the things they know and their misconceptions, and not jump to conclusions about what it has been like for them. So we don't know what children and young people's present is like, and we won't know until we've spent time with them in our classrooms, exploring the issues, doing baseline assessments, finding out from them. And of course, as you'll well know from the young people you're working with, many will have had some positive experiences, will have welcomed more time with family, more time outside, a brief respite from the pressures of school. Many will have had the opportunity to help others, will have learned from the experiences of community and fellowship that have been so prevalent throughout this crisis. But as you'll also know, either seeing them in school or however you're communicating with the pupils you work with, there are a few things it's reasonable to assume all children and young people will have had to deal with, starting with being locked down with family. Their day-to-day experiences at home with their parents or carers will for many have led to more intense relationships, both positively and negatively. In their home, they may suffer a lack of privacy, a lack of autonomy, and for all the benefits of online relationships, social isolation. As one child told the Children's Commissioner, the worst things about lockdown are no friends, not having siblings so I'm lonely, and having to hear my dog bark all day. So the home will be a place of heightened intensity, but also a place of monotony, and a place where many will have felt trapped. And in being locked down at home and locked out of school, all have experienced loss. They have lost the routine and structure that school provides, the daily friendship, freedom, and many have lost that opportunity for growth, development, and learning. Many have also lost the opportunity to take their exams, events which are not only assessments, but milestones and rituals on the pathway to adulthood. As you know, they may be feeling cheated out of that experience. They may be feeling angry and hard done by. Indeed, I wouldn't blame young people for feeling angry, not simply about lost exams, but about the entire crisis. It might feel unfair for all of us, but adults can recognize that this will be over at some time in the future. For teenagers, this may seem like the whole of their life has been taken away from them. And with that loss might come a sense of bereavement, a sense of grief for lost opportunities, lost certainties, lost friendships. What Alex Evans of the Collective Psychology Project has highlighted as the passing of a way of life as we realize how many things will not go back to normal after the outbreak has ended. And this for a generation who before the lockdown were already forced to question the certainty of their futures. A generation already asking, how am I supposed to plan and care about my future when my leaders aren't doing the same? A generation already suffering from what the environmental philosopher Glenn Albrecht has called solastalgia, the pain and physical stress caused by environmental change. He described it as homesickness for a home you haven't left, but which is changing before your eyes. And whilst he meant this about the pain of losing places that are important to us, this feels to me like a perfect description of the emerging nostalgia for a way of life which we took for granted before COVID-19 stopped the machine and bits fell off. We know when we put it back together, it will never be the same. Some parts are gone forever, and others may need to be totally rethought. It will be some time before we understand the full mental health impacts of the pandemic and our response to it. But this loss of certainty and fear for the future may well increase young people's anxiety, that sense that we can't control the threats we face. And this, of course, in addition to direct anxiety about the virus. Will my parents stay safe? What about my grandparents? Am I safe from the virus? So, loss, grief, trauma, anxiety. These are possible and obvious themes of the present for our children and young people. And of course, they won't be for every child. They may be a backdrop for some and a foreground for others. But if that is the present, what about the future? Well, we cannot possibly know all the ways in which COVID will reshape our world. But we do know that the economic shock is unprecedented in its scale. It has brought entire sections of the economy to a standstill, including sectors which young people are more likely to work in or get their first jobs in, such as services and hospitality. 1 in 5 households are already struggling to pay bills, and over 1 million people registered for universal credit in the first week of lockdown. The UK is clearly headed for recession, and government borrowing is likely to outstrip GDP at a time when GDP has already plummeted to record lows. At some point, the bill will have to be paid, and whilst who pays for it will depend on the type of politics we have at the time, whatever happens, it will be our children and young people picking up the pieces for years to come. And they know this. They will be aware of this and concerned because before the pandemic, they were already facing economic challenges, such as declining mobility, falling real wages, fewer opportunities, stagnant and even declining living standards. Their older brothers and sisters have already been dubbed the unluckiest generation. What pithy description will our current pupils be lumbered with? So, in terms of young people's futures, as Virginia Woolf wrote in 1915, 6 months into the First World War, the future is dark. But she went on to say, which is, on the whole, the best thing the future can be, I think. Dark, then, as in unknowable, but not necessarily unavoidably terrible. There is nothing inevitable about the future, and there is reason for hope. Just look to the past. After the Great Depression and after the Second World War, social movements emerged which helped build fairer and more collective societies than those that had been before. And what the last few months have told us about humans is not a story of panic, but a story of help, a story of community. So we can hope. But authentic hope, as Rebecca Solnit writes, requires clarity, seeing the troubles in this world, and imagination, seeing what might lie beyond these situations that are perhaps not inevitable and immutable. Now, before we think about what might lie beyond, about the imagination we need for hope, let's think about the clarity required, seeing the troubles in this world, because COVID is helping us see them anew. I opened by saying that PSHE has never been more vital, but it must respond to the apocalyptic nature of what we are experiencing. Again, apocalypse, not as in end of days, but as in revelation. And in ancient times, revelation was the disclosure of information to man by a divine or supernatural agency. Now, there's nothing divine or supernatural about COVID, but it is disclosing information, telling us a story, showing us a picture of ourselves. And if you want supernatural, it does remind me of Ouija, the crime photographer, so named because people thought he used a Ouija board to get to the scene of crimes almost before they happened. COVID-19 has come to the scene and popped its flashbulb on our country and taken a photograph of stark contrasts. A photograph of a country in which inequality is literally killing the people who live in its long shadows. So for all of my talk about what the present might be like for young people and what the future might hold, we can't pretend that it's the same for all of us, that we met the pandemic from the same starting points. We might all be experiencing the same storm, but we are definitely not all in the same boat. And we weren't in the same boat before this happened. Young people's health, well-being, and financial futures are deeply affected by their social, economic, and ethnic backgrounds. Of course we know this. This is an obvious truism. But do I really know that? Have I always heard that, listened to that? The way in which COVID has disproportionately affected those from already disadvantaged backgrounds, and Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds, tells an urgent story about our society. Many of you will have direct experience of this, personally, professionally, and didn't need COVID to tell you this old story. But I've been wondering why this story has such a fresh power. Perhaps because in this experience, which in asking us to stay 2 meters away from each other has shown how interconnected we all are, how reliant we all are on each other, the experiences of some have been so very different. Perhaps because when we ask, why are more people from deprived areas and some ethnic backgrounds getting sick and dying, alongside the complex interplay of socioeconomics, of history, of class, of racism and discrimination, there is a simple fact. They were already getting sick and dying. As we have learned, the risk of getting very sick and dying from COVID is firstly age-related, but after that, strongly affected by whether or not you have other long-term health conditions, including diabetes, and whether you're obese. But before the pandemic, the risk of developing a long-term health condition or multiple long-term conditions is strongly patterned by where you live and your level of deprivation. And diabetes management, obesity, and asthma are strongly affected by your level of deprivation, starting in childhood. For example, children in the most deprived areas are 4 times more likely to be severely obese than those in the least deprived, and twice as likely to be admitted to hospital for asthma. In starkest terms, a girl or boy born in one of the most deprived areas of this country expects to live at least 18 fewer years in good health than one born in one of the least deprived areas. Now, these are not new facts, but COVID has laid them out there for us. If you're deprived, the dice were already loaded against you. So are we surprised when adjusting for age, mortality rates from COVID-19 in the most deprived areas were more than double the least deprived for both males and females? And then, as the Office for National Statistics and the Institute for Fiscal Studies have highlighted, hospital deaths are highest among the Black Caribbean population, 3 times those of the white British majority, with similarly disproportionate death rates seen in other ethnic groups. Again, the health inequalities linked to deprivation will be part of this story. But as the leaked recommendations from the Public Health England review suggest, so will the structural racism, discrimination and stigma which underpin the link between deprivation and ethnicity in the first place. So without denying the complexity of the reasons for these inequalities, they do raise a simple question. Are we okay with this? Are we okay to start talking about a new normal without questioning whether what was normal before was really the country we want to live in? And of course, many people are asking this question, and Black Lives Matter is answering that question with a new and necessary urgency. And perhaps this is a moment of possibility, a moment when we can believe that there is nothing inevitable about a future which continues the mistakes of the past. Because as we know, the vast majority of people don't want this to be a glimpse of our future. Because if it is, when crisis comes again, as we see the increasing impact of our changing climate, it will be those without means, those who perhaps are struggling, perhaps have already suffered, who will be the ones to suffer first and suffer most. And we've just seen what that looks like. Are we willing to be numbed to this? Or is it time to hope, to see the troubles of the world with clarity and to harness our imaginations, to see what might lie beyond that is not inevitable? Now, at this point, I get it. You might be saying to yourself, yes, I know all of this, but what on earth is this man asking of me? What does this man think my school can do about this, or PSHE education can do about this? About issues so deeply embedded in the structures of our society. What's PSHE going to do here? Well, stay with me for a minute. Of course, PSHE education cannot solve problems that are fundamentally political, about the ways in which wealth is distributed and the legacies of Britain's colonial and post-industrial history. But if we believe our schools play a role in building the society of tomorrow, hardly a radical suggestion, simply a fact, then we need a curriculum that is about more than just recovery from the experiences of the pandemic and a return to normality. but one which responds to the revelations of the pandemic and is about renewal. And if this is a curriculum we want, then PSHE education has a central role. Because PSHE is about the present, so can start to respond to the needs of every child and young person as they come back to school as part of the strategy to reconnect pupils, to help pupils feel bonded again, to explore their experiences in a safe way and focus on critical issues such as friendship, emotional well-being, change and loss. And PSHE is about the future, supporting young people to build and maintain lasting relationships, developing the knowledge and skills about the new economic world they will be entering, developing their financial capabilities, supporting them in their aspirations and careers. And PSHE is about equality in two ways. Firstly, by teaching about equality, which of course means teaching about prejudice, discrimination and racism, and developing skills and strategies to challenge them. But secondly, PSHE education itself should have an equalizing effect, because PSHE education is about giving every child access to teaching about things which matter to every human being, their health and well-being, relationships, their aspirations for the future. But fundamentally, it is about their agency. It is about ensuring young people have knowledge and skills they need to be in control of the choices they have in any situation, and to be able to make decisions which they are happy to call their own, to be agents in their own lives. But the number of choices we have, and whether our choices are free or constrained, is linked to poverty and deprivation, prejudice and discrimination. That is to say, the amount of control that we have over our own lives is unevenly distributed. And whilst PSHE education cannot solve that problem, it can give equal access to teaching which will help every child understand choices when they are faced with them, the influences on those choices, the constraints on their choices, even if the only choice available to them in a situation is whether or not to seek help. Now, this crisis has shown us all the very clear limits of what humans can control. So if we can give back even some small sense of control to every child, in fancy language, develop their self-efficacy, we can not only support young people's recovery, but ensure they are able to say, "I can," when we need them to lead our renewal into the future. So if it takes imagination for us to hope, let's imagine that every child in every school had access to this education. And with most of PSHE becoming compulsory from September, it doesn't take much imagination. But there is still much to be done. The statutory guidance, which is historic and to be celebrated, is just a skeleton, a list of content. It is up to us to give it heart and body and make it dance. And we will do that together. Because PSHE education is ready for this, our new start. Thank you.